Hello and welcome. Let me introduce you to our host and panel moderator, Stacy Devino.
Hello, y'all. And it is my personal, greatest thing ever to be able to introduce you to some of our panelists tonight. For reference, our topic is the path from engineer to manager. And to give you a little bit of context about what's going to happen tonight, everything is very conversational. And we kind of move where the conversation moves, although we do have seated questions. We also encourage you to actively participate by putting questions in the chat or just raising a hand and saying, hey, I would love to hear more about this. It's really important that you treat this as basically a really large mentor circle hangout. And this is an opportunity for you and for the opportunity of our panelists to learn collectively. So just because they're a panelist doesn't mean that you can't tap on a shoulder or ask a question. We encourage you to as part of this event. So to get started with the intros, I'm going to start with Caree Youngman. Caree Youngman is a senior engineering manager at Stitch Fix who got her start as a self-taught front-end engineer after dropping out of college. She volunteered with Women Who Code's Dallas-Fort Worth chapter as a regional director from 2016 to 2020, and is now on the board of Vets Who Code, a nonprofit organization that teaches veterans to code. When she's not working or volunteering, she's hanging out with her husband and 2 children. Next is Molly King. Molly King is a senior engineering manager at Target with roughly 8 years of experience as an Android engineer. Outside of work, she enjoys baking, watching her husband play baseball, and volunteering with the Austin Animal Center. I know there's a lot more that Molly does here, so I hope you get a chance to really meet her tonight. And thank you so much, Molly. Sita Anamaranju. Sita is a mobile engineering manager at Cash App and has a background in Android development. She cares deeply about building inclusive teams, mentorship, and improving culture for engineering teams, and crafting solutions out of ambiguity. She has spoken at multiple conferences, such as DroidCon San Francisco and Women Who Code, on various topics. In her free time, Sita enjoys staying outdoors as much as possible. Thank you, Sita. Stephanie Kondik. Stephanie is an established leader in the tech industry with 2 decades of experience, presently serving as the Director of Software Engineering at Mason in Seattle. She's widely recognized for creating CyanogenMod, an aftermarket operating system for Android devices, which she later built a VC-backed startup around and served as CTO. Outside of work, Stephanie is an avid skater and plays flat track roller derby. She also loves dance and producing electronic music while balancing it all with 3 kids in the mix. Sounds like a lot, my goodness. I mean, really, my goodness, on all of our panelists. I wish I could tell each of you individually right now how much overlap you have in some of your interests. Even just from your intros, I'm ooh, Molly, I seem to remember something about skating, something about yeah, yep, just a little bit. So I hope that this is a great opportunity for everyone to get to know each other a little bit more, build a little bit more of their network, and most importantly, have fun tonight. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. Before we get started, does anyone have any questions? All right. So I think the first one is we'll just make this an easy knockout, right? How did you become an engineer? And I know that Caree gave a little bit of a statement here, but I know that it's far more complicated than that, right? Like the path to even just becoming an engineer. What was this like part of your trajectory? Did you know you wanted to? What was the education? What kind of engineering? or was it just something you found and loved? What was it for you first?
Yeah, to be honest, growing up, I never considered programming as a career path. I think that, like many women in tech, I had an image of what a programmer was at that time, and I didn't see myself in that image, right? I thought, programming was for men, and men with specific interests, and maybe really into video games. I'm not a video game person, things like that. So it wasn't until I graduated high school that I began to consider the career path. To be honest, it was a financial decision almost. So if you can relate to this as a high schooler or a college student, you're like Googling, what's the most lucrative career that I can get a degree for? That was basically my Google search that led me to web development. And I also had friends who studied computer science at UT Dallas, and I saw their homework, honestly, and I was like, I could do that. So this intimidating image of what a programmer was began to break down bit by bit. And I'm so grateful to my friends at the time who made it really accessible and less intimidating by tutoring me and helping me. I did enroll in computer science. I did drop out. It was a combination of burning out. It was a combination of financial barriers. College is expensive, and I didn't have a lot of assistance with it. And, lastly, I just didn't see in the curriculum the technology that I was really interested in. So I was learning, C++ and all of that foundational stuff that you learn in college. And that's great, but I wanted to be a web developer. And I knew that for that, I needed JavaScript, I needed CSS, I needed things like that. And it was nowhere in the curriculum at that time. It might be different now. So I dropped out for all of those reasons and basically said, I think I'm going to try to teach myself. I think I can do it. I think I've got enough foundational knowledge. I've got enough community and friends that are willing to help me along the way. And I'm just going to go for it. Worst case scenario, I re-enroll in college, right? And go back to my CS degree program. So I gave it 6 months. I watched a lot of YouTube. There's still great content on YouTube. There are paid programs. I think I took Team Treehouse at the time, and I heavily abused their free trial program. Just made like a bunch of different email addresses to get a free trial over and over again and take all of the classes that way. And then built my resume from there and was able to transition into tech, relatively easily, considering the not so direct path into tech that I took.
Ollie, Steph, Sitha, how'd your journey go?
I was smiling during that whole thing because so much of that like resonated with me. I took one computer science class in high school. I loved it. I did well. I loved my teacher. I didn't see myself as a software engineer. I didn't see that as a viable career. And I mean, that was, before smartphones existed. So like my current career just didn't exist at all. So engineering is like my third career. I got bored with the one I was in at the time. It was online marketing. And I said, you know what? I was actually playing roller derby, much like Steph at the time. And I was like, you know what our league needs is an app, because I'm such a like smartphone fangirl, love apps. I was like, everything needs to be an app. We need an app. And so I guess I should make it. And so then I thought, how do you do that? And luckily I knew somebody in the league who was an Android engineer. And so she got me started. She started taking me to Women Who Code meetups, actually, and helped me, understand the difference between Java and JavaScript, because I did not realize there was one at first. And she actually hooked me up with the person who gave me my first job as well. And yeah, it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, I could jump in next. So I think my path to engineering was pretty non-traditional. Like I think most of us here, honestly. I managed to convince my parents when I was like 8 years old to get me a Commodore 64. So learned everything about it. got into things like the demo scene and making art with computers, and that was really fun. And I wasn't a very like social kid. I was kind of a recluse, so that really fed my need in a lot of ways. But then I got away from it as I got older. I didn't really think that it was a viable career path. I didn't think I really liked it, and my family like really actively discouraged me from it. I don't know why. But eventually, when we started having dial-up internet providers and stuff, I managed to get a technical support job at didn't go to college or anything. After high school, I just kind of goofed off for a while and all that. But eventually, I got a job as like entry level tech support for a new ISP in Pittsburgh, and after being there for a little bit, the way that we were managing like our trouble tickets and stuff, we were basically using an NNTP news group, and it was just like, it was awful. Like, I don't know how they got anything done before that. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna write a new trouble ticketing system from scratch. So I wrote one in PHP, and it caught on, and we used it, and that sort of helped me kind of get a foothold at the company, and like push myself towards like bigger stuff. And it took years. I think I was at that place for, I don't know, about 8 years. And when I left, I was a software engineer when I left, and mostly working on like infrastructure kind of stuff, like software for like our hosting customers to build out their websites and everything like that, early days of the internet. So I was able to get in there, and mostly since then I've just kind of like bounced around between different companies, a bunch of different startups and things like that before I finally took on some of my own projects, and and moved out to Seattle and got into even bigger stuff.
It's really nice to hear everyone else's background. I see like similarities in everyone's. So I'm also not a video game person. So when I first started out, I was like, okay, computer science isn't my thing. But I also didn't really know the difference between computer science and electrical and computer engineering. And in my head, I was like, okay, I could be a doctor, but that would take forever. So instead, I'm just going to choose engineering. And traditionally, those were like the common paths, like in my family. So that's just how I started. And then I took EE. I was doing electrical and computer engineering for a while, and then I took electives in computer science. And my first CS 111 class was where I was like, this is fun, but I also suck at it. So it took a while for me to realize like, this is actually not that easy for me. And I took that as a challenge. And I think that really was what propelled my interest in a strange way. But I also started doing research in like more computer science and like OpenCV and things like that. And it was kind of interesting just doing those research opportunities, because I would find a different professor every semester and just explore like what's out there. And that's what got me interested. And towards the end of my undergrad was when I did a research program with a professor that focused on mobile. And he wanted to build a kind of a pathfinding app, basically. And so that was my first interest into Android development. And that's when I was like, okay, this is very cool. And I can build things quickly. It doesn't take a lot of time. I could do whatever I want. So that's how I got into it. But it wasn't really like a path I saw for myself. It was just that I wanted to be really good at the courses that I took. And that was really all I was seeing. But like the conferences, going to events like Women Who Code, and particularly Grace Hopper at the time was very useful for me, just seeing a lot of women and just talking to people and knowing what are the career paths out there. It just really helped, because in my engineering school, like there were, I think, 3 women total. So it was a very big shift, but over time I slowly gained confidence, and like I was doing internships, and then yeah, that's kind of how my path was.
Oh man, all of those are so interesting. So, and now that we've kind of gotten to know a little bit about kind of the backgrounds of everyone, really where and what was like your first opportunity for leadership? Something that gave you that first little insight that this might be the path for you, right? The thing that you're like, ooh, right? So yeah, I'm really interested to learn, like, what was that spark that said, hey, management, technical management might be kind of my thing a little bit.
Well,
Yeah, I think
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think just like computer programming didn't seem appealing to me in the beginning, and I thought that's not for me. It was the same with leadership. So I had a job at a company called Alchemy. That's actually where I met Stacy here in Dallas. And I was a front end engineer, and I was a junior front end engineer. So very little experience, just trying to get my footing in the industry and figure things out. And it was really on accident that, this newly formed team had a lot of process gaps. It had a lot of communication breakdowns with our cross-functional partners. And there was, I'll be honest, it was kind of an unhappy time. People were, venting daily about these things. People were unhappy. And I just kind of wanted to fix these process breakdowns so that we could see, our team become more productive and happier. Honestly, I want to work with happy people, right? So kind of took responsibility for resolving some of these process breakdowns, in trying to fix, some of our relationships with our cross-functional partners. And that's where it really started. So I never guessed when I started that job that I would one day transition into a team lead role. That was the last thing on my mind. But slowly and gradually, as I began to take responsibility for solving some of these problems and filling in some of those gaps where no one seemed to be taking ownership of a problem or responsibility for a problem, I was noticed for that effort, thankfully, and had a lot of people who were appreciative of that and advocated for me. And eventually that did turn into kind of this informal team lead role within a couple of years.
I'll jump in. My first leadership role as an adult was not actually a technical leadership role. It was back in Derby, and I fell flat on my face in pretty much every sense of that phrase. I whiffed it so hard, and it doesn't, the details don't matter, but what's important is that I realized like what I missed out on, the amount of change I could have affected, the good change I could have affected, because I got so tied up in my own kind of like protecting my ego. And so that really like taught me about the importance of just putting yourself aside when you're in a leadership position. And I think that really gave me the confidence, like Sita mentioned, that computer science was like kind of the first thing that you really enjoyed, but you weren't very good at when you started. And that's what skating was for me. It was the first thing that I like loved to do, but was really terrible at. And so once I kind of put in the sweat equity and got better at it, that gave me the confidence to go, okay, I really sucked at running things, but maybe I can get better if I keep trying. And so I'm kind of, I don't know, I feel like I'm kind of a rarity among engineering managers in that I always wanted to be an EM. Like once I figured out kind of what the role was, I always knew I wanted to be in a leadership position, and that, writing code was a way to get there. But it wasn't the end all for me. For me, it was really about being able to lead a team of people who are making the cool stuff.
Yeah, I feel that one in a big way. And I feel like coding was sort of like a means to an end, I guess. For me, I had I mean, I've like started different projects just because I'm like very ADHD and just like to like dig into lots of random stuff. And that's how like I kind of manifest things, just the chaos in my brain. But like I think my first real opportunity for like professional leadership was whenever I started working for Samsung. They kind of brought me in and to work on mobile devices, the Galaxies and the Notes and everything. But I'm a pretty creative person. I'm good at coming up with random ideas and stuff. And what ended up happening was I sort of fell into a position where I was leading an R&D team, and a bunch of the people that we hired in Bellevue kind of they brought everybody together under me, and our job was to make cool stuff for Samsung, and that was really fun. We didn't actually productize anything, unfortunately, and that's a whole rant for later, but it did give me the opportunity to to like really like manage how all of that stuff is working. And I wasn't necessarily doing a lot of people management at that time. That would kind of come later on, but it was a good way to get my feet wet. And also, I feel like I'm pretty good at pulling lots of people together and kind of getting alignment around different things. So, it feels really good. And, also it's kind of hard for me to get the time that it needs and the focus that you need to write like really good software. It's just, yeah, it works and it seems to work out great for me. So
I think for me, it was, I was naturally gravitating towards leading things, and I was just very stubborn and did not want that to happen. And the reason for that was I felt like if I move into management, then I will lose that technical credibility. So I fought it really hard. And I didn't meet a lot of people that went through something similar. So for me, it was just really hard. But I was just like, I just became good at finding like the gaps and finding ways to gather people around it, like Stephanie said, and just like motivating people towards a certain solution and making sure that everyone is seeing themselves grow like during that process. And so like I did that, way before like internships. I was doing that in like my master's. Like we had just like a small project, and I was leading a team and we won first place. Like there were just a lot of signals and I just ignored it until like I joined Cash, and then it was just like pandemic hit and I was like, okay, I have to like change something about what I'm doing. But for me, I think it was there were a lot of like natural instincts that helped me towards leadership.
That's so interesting. It's funny. I'm also thinking about some of the folks here who are just going like, I saw code as more of like a means to an end, and I wasn't so sure, I was the most technical person. And I reflect on some of the people in this room, and I'm going like, knock, knock, excuse me. Some of the brilliance that's come out of just different conversations, various help things. These are people I absolutely turn to and have referenced and used in the past. So like, they might be being a little bit modest in this regard right now. So now that we've kind of gone through those pieces of leadership and where those opportunities were, I think one of the largest hurdles, and what a lot of people here might be wondering is, okay, I've decided I want to go down the engineering manager path. I have created kind of the right alignment internally. What does that look like in terms of the things that people don't know about or haven't thought about in terms of what a manager does? Because I think a lot of engineers, and I kind of face this a lot as someone who's been more in the like high level tech lead kind of portion where people are just like going, they don't do anything, they don't whatever. And I'm just going like, if you only knew that 50% of my job is like politics and writing slides, then imagine what a manager is going through, where that's literally part of their written job description. So, and budgeting and all these kinds of things. What are some of the things that people need to know about an engineering manager job that may not be immediately obvious, or even the different kinds of engineering managers that there might be? Different places have different things, right? Some are more like, are very technical. So I went through a bunch of interviews this time around for finding my next job. My engineering manager interviews also had, coding as part of the interviews, like more than once. All of these things. How do you relate to all these portions of the job beyond the project management, beyond the technical management, beyond the people management? What are things we need to know?
Maybe I can start with the thing that I think is most important that people tend to miss. And I genuinely feel like this is what makes the difference between a really good manager and like a manager that you want to leave the role for. So a manager that does not care about their team happens often. They care more about the technology or like the code itself than the people on the team. And I find that managers that do that tend to lose their team quickly. So it seems like an obvious thing, but it's really easy for you to evaluate. Like if you're leaning towards the people side of things, like you care genuinely about your team and their growth, that's a good sign. Like it's okay, engineering management will sort of work out. But I think on the other side, if you're not able to let go of the code, there's a difference between jumping into write code sometimes versus like, I can't let go of writing code. I think that's like slightly different. So yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. I've seen that as a red flag many times, where a manager will jump in to write code and start like micromanaging.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I was kind of unprepared for whenever I, really started doing engineering management was just like the sheer amount of like chaos that you have to manage behind the scenes, like hiring, staffing, when your leads decide that they're going to move on, and how do you cover those roles? If you have managers reporting to you, what happens when they leave? You have to take over their team, which is something I'm currently doing right now. So, not only are you managing managers, but you're also managing ICs. So, that becomes another layer of stuff that's going on. And, just generally all of like the people stuff that has to happen, because, you're really becoming somebody whose main job is to enable your team and not necessarily do all the work yourself. And definitely for somebody like me who likes to do the technical stuff, that was really hard for me to break away from. And it's still something that I struggle with from time to time, is like wanting to do technical work, but just not having the ability or, time to do it. So you really just have to like learn, you have to get to know your people, and you have to trust your team, and you have to, learn a whole new skill set, really. And be ready for whatever's gonna happen, because it's gonna happen.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think it ebbs and flows a lot, and you have to, like, it's corny, but you have to wear a lot of hats, right? And sometimes I say I missed my calling as a cruise director, which who knows, maybe that'll be my next career. But I love to like organize events and get everybody like excited about doing the thing. And so that part of my job is super fun. And like, I just planned like a 3-day on-site for my team in Minneapolis, and we had a great time. I took them to a baseball game. Like that stuff is my bread and butter. But then having to like turn around and, you know, if I have to have a difficult conversation with an engineer that, you know, I guess I thought that, oh, you just hire well and then people just manage themselves in terms of like their, you know, code output and their productivity. That, it turns out, is not the case. And actually can be pretty hands-on sometimes. And you have to have really clear, really uncomfortable, frank conversations sometimes. And that was probably the part of the job I was the least prepared for, was the like, you know, just telling people you gotta step it up, bud.
Riddy, you have a question?
Yeah, so I think I do have a question. It's not to anyone particular, but you guys all kind of touched on it of with this new position. So I currently got promoted to junior IT project manager, and one of my struggle was from being coworkers to manager. So that was like, oh, I was more like goofing around and whatever. And then now you're a manager, or not manager, but you know, supervisor. So I thought, well, how did you guys handle that? And then also, I have 2 questions, sorry. And then also, because I started as computer science and programming and stuff like that. So when I got promoted, now my tasks have been to detach from coding and programming and cloud and all that stuff. So it's hard for me to let go. So too, right? So it's like, I think I don't know how you guys tackle that part of it as well. Yeah. So yeah.
I relate to this. In one of my first leadership roles, you know, overnight, you know, you go from colleagues and friends to, you know, now they're your direct report, you're their manager, and there's just a automatic, really, it really is automatic shift in the relationship that happens as soon as that relationship changes, right? It can be awkward, it can be uncomfortable. The thing that helped me, I took my job description. I asked my manager to write me a job description. I want it very clear. I want bullet points. I want you to tell me, what is my job? What's the definition of success for my role? I printed it out and I kept it nearby, you know, when I was at work and when I was struggling to know where the boundary was, I would refer back to that and I would ground myself in, what am I responsible for? What makes me successful in this role? Because if you're focused on that, that also means that you're focused on the success of your reports. And it's easy to draw the line and say, this is a situation where it might be more appropriate to take a step back. You know, like lunchtime venting sessions were a thing that became very awkward for me as a new leader, because, you know, as a leader, yes, you can vent, but also you're very, very responsible for solving problems, and you're almost venting about yourself to a point if you indulge in that a little too much. And so giving my team distance in those matters, you know, delivering difficult feedback, but grounding that in, you know, their role, what the definition of success is for their role. A book I'd recommend for you as a new leader, if you haven't read it, is Radical Candor. It really, really helped me learn to craft feedback. I would rehearse, you know, how am I going to have this difficult conversation? I would pull in a peer manager and I would say, pretend you're this person. I'm going to give you some feedback. Tell me how it goes. It really goes a long way to, you know, number one, kind of calming your nerves, because that can be really hard. And, you know, and also making sure that you're defining that feedback in a really, really clear way for them.
Thank you.
I kind of wanted to add on to this too, just because there's this line that exists that you have to play as part of the leadership. So, and I think Caree and I had a lot of these conversations when she first moved into that position too, at the time. And because I was kind of already in that over a couple of groups at the same company. And which was a weird situation because you were both kind of tech lead and frontline manager. It was reflecting on that has left so many weird thoughts in my brain. And so I'm like going, why did they have me in charge of like 3 or 4 divisions? That was the weirdest deal ever. But really it's having to make a lot of odd decisions, and you can be friends. You can absolutely be friends, but you also need to be respectful of the fact that like things that you can say and do have more impact and meaning, and to relay that appropriately. So when we talk about the radical candor thing, everyone should be practicing that, I firmly believe. But especially when it comes to how you treat people who are both your collaborators, like you need them. You need to treat them with respect. You almost should treat that relationship with more respect than you ever have. But there's also another aspect to this that is a little bit gross, and it'll lead into kind of some of our other stuff too a little bit later, is success is perception, and that perception changes based off of who's perceiving it. So one of the biggest mistakes that I did as part of that job, now, honestly, the bullet points that I was able to get done at that place in like a year, you would not believe, like actually would not believe. You'd be thinking that these people would be throwing money at my feet and like all these other kinds of things, right? I turned around a team with virtually no staff changes, built an entire secondary division, helped build a further 2 divisions in the company, and then also took their like 80 plus applications from a 2.37 star average to a 4.8 star average in just a little over 9 months. Built out their entire analytics. I'm retired, like the bullet points are stupid, right? Super successful with the team, super successful with most of the company. 3 people wanted to play politics and BS games, and I refused to play. Those 3 people basically sabotaged my ability to stay at that company long term for reasons that had nothing to do with my success. Willing to work with them. I bent over backwards. I brought baked goods. Ma'am, I brought baked goods more than once to be like, hey, I have this idea. I would love for your input. Da, da, da. But there's just sometimes your success can make other people uncomfortable. That's what happened in one of the situations. What the other situation is, I just had another person who was in leadership for my group who was straight up lying to my face, like just did not, whatever. And then one was like a very senior leader in the company who really just wanted people to be very impressed by what they were doing or bought or spent money on. And I just wasn't impressed. I just was here to show you what our team was doing and how we can help things grow, right? Like, and so, you know, you have to learn how to play to certain personalities and know what those personalities own or do. What I didn't realize is one of those people basically had like blackmail on everybody else in senior leadership. And if I should have known that I should have been playing 90% of my politics to make this one person happy, or just find a way to completely avoid them in all different situations. Like knowing the lay of the land of the organization that you're in is, at a lot of companies, we're not saying big companies, we're not saying great companies, we're just saying a lot of companies, right? Good, bad, whatever. Knowing the lay of the land and how to play the politics or what the expectations are for each individual voice. Even if you don't work with these people, I can tell you, all 3 of those people I didn't work with. at all. Like they were not part of my day-to-day. They were not my chain, all that stuff. It's so, so important. And I was doing so much work. There's no way I could afford the time and effort and everything else to like handle that. So like that just, I wouldn't have had a different outcome, but that's something to be aware of, especially as you're new in this position, is really respect everyone, change the way that narrative works. But also just really make sure that you have the right alignment, like you understand the motivations and politics of the people in your chain, the right support, all that kind of stuff. Sorry, I didn't mean to like take over. Hi, y'all. I would love to hear some more answers.
No, thank you. That was really awesome. No.
Yeah, I'd love to add on to that real quick. You know, you mentioned like the definition of like what success looks like whenever you whenever you're a leader. It looks very different than what it looks like whenever you're an IC. You know, whenever you're an IC, and I love this feeling. I'm like addicted to it. I love being the hero. I love saving the day. I love like fixing like a huge production bug that, or optimizing something that, has been giving everybody grief for, the last 6 months or something like that. I love that feeling. When you are in management, you don't really get to do as much of that. Success really is about how how your team is performing, and how are they succeeding, and if they're succeeding, then you're succeeding. So you kind of have to take your own like personal drive for like fame and glory or whatever it is that you're deriving. You kind of have to take that a little bit out of the equation. It really becomes more about like, working with all these other people. And, like Stacy said, sometimes it involves working with people that aren't very apt to work with you. You have to spend a lot of time networking and getting to know everybody from other teams, and getting to know your project managers and your salespeople and people that, likely, don't share the same kind of philosophy as you might have, or the same knowledge about the product or technology at all in general. So, it's sort of integrating all of these different personalities and knowing how to work with them. That's really challenging.
I want to add, like, if you have been working with someone and then they're now your directs, this happened to me as well. One thing that I found really helps with my team is knowing, as Caree said, knowing what is success for your role as a manager, but also knowing how you can help your ICs or directs become successful. Like, what does success mean for their roles? And making it very clear that the way you're managing is for their success. Like, my team knows that if I give them feedback, it is in their best interest. And that takes time to develop. But if you can establish that trust with your team, it almost doesn't matter whether you were friends before or not. You're kind of saying we're on the same page here. Like, we both want you to succeed. Here's how you can get there. And so delivering feedback becomes a little bit easier when you come from a place of care or empathy. And they know that. And I found that makes the relationship much better. And it's also like, I don't ever see the relationship as me like looking down on my team and like, barking orders at them. I never see it that way. I see it as an equal relationship. My role is slightly different, where I see things at a higher level than they do, but I don't see them as unequal to me. And I think for me that helps a lot. And then for the second part of your question on like moving away from coding, I found that for me personally, moving away from coding a little bit later in my career has helped, because I was able to grab some of that experience and apply it back and giving feedback at a higher level, not to like go into PR PRs and like review, but at least like when someone's faced with an issue, like most recently, someone came to me and they were like, I don't think the solution is the best for a client. And I was like, hey, why don't you, like, are you against it? Like, why do you think this is not? And like, can you go and talk to the team? And they didn't have like a good way to, like, how do you frame that? And so I was able to take my experience and give them a thought framework to structure questions and like go back to the team and propose a different solution. So it's that experience that you really need. It's not like you don't need a particular language, or like you don't need to know the syntax of a language, but you need to understand like how systems work in general, like how they interact, what dependencies might look like, what can go wrong, what do costs look like. And those things do come over time. So personally, like, I feel like it's if you are able to develop that, it makes you a stronger engineering manager than without, but you can get that experience like on the side as well. Like, it doesn't have to be from your current role.
Yeah, that's what I was scared of for feedback purposes. I was always just afraid of, I can't really do implementation to the extent I would like to. So maybe I was just thinking, just for personally, like continuing my tech career on the side, with doing side projects and stuff like that, along with that work, doing the management side of the side things. But I don't know if that's a good parallel like path, or
I personally think so. I do want to say that in my experience, it's much easier to go from an IC to an EM than from going from an EM back to an IC. It like that path is slightly harder, not impossible, just slightly harder over time. So that's like historically that's been the case. So you have to think about that as well.
All right. Thank you.
I feel like there's got to be something itching on Steph from some of that, just as someone who's gone a little bit back and forth and hybrid on some of that.
Yeah. I think going back to like becoming, going back to being an IC again after being a leader, it's definitely doable. I mean, I did it and it was very satisfying for me for a while. I was just kind of fried from my startup, and I'm like, okay, I just want to get back to the technology. I want to write code. I want to build cool stuff again. So, I did that for a couple of years and then ended up back in management. But yeah, it is a definitely like a perceptual shift either way. And I think if you were to do something like that, you might not be able to pull off the same thing, like shifting around at the same company, because like once you're kind of in that role, you're kind of always going to be seen there, and you're always going to get pulled into lots of random stuff. And maybe you have more influence doing that, but I feel like if I try to do that at my current company, I would just be pulled in 1,000 different directions. No matter what, I just wouldn't be able to focus. So you almost have to start in a new role, I feel like.
Yeah, that's kind of my dilemma at the moment anyways, because I start off as like a help desk. So then that's where we provide services to schools, tech services, and then we have a help desk session. I'm a help desk area, and then we also have the tech support related to software, and then that's where the transitioning is. And I don't know if I'm hitting a wall here or what's going on. Yeah. So that's why I wanted to reach out and see your opinions.
I will say, at least in my experience, that never rely on work to provide you personal satisfaction. So if you do anything on the side, make sure that is about you and your own, like fulfilling your needs, not that you're trying to chase down some sort of expectation of yourself, because that will ultimately fail. Speaking as a very type A, ENTJ, hello everyone. Like that, you really just you're so early in your career on that part that, you know, really figure out what brings you fulfillment that you're not guaranteed, and figure out what you need to do in order to get that, right? So as Sitha probably also knows from speaking at various events, right? Like, you don't always know everything about the thing that you submitted for, but you use it as an opportunity to get even more information and more depth and, you know, expand knowledge. And I think it's kind of good to think about projects in that regard too. I'm interested, Molly, we haven't heard from you in a minute.
I'm still pretty new in my management career. So there's a lot of these things that I've been doing it for, I don't know, year and a half. So I haven't had the opportunity, but I also haven't had personally just the desire to go back and forth between IC and management. I don't know. I feel like I'm still at the point where I don't know half of what I need to know to really be good at my job. So it's opportunities to learn, you know. It's and I think that as a leader, like, just like drawing from my personal experience and my kind of falling flat on my face the first time I had a leadership opportunity, it's about staying humble and really, like, I think staff talked about like defining success as, you know, success for your team, not success for yourself. And I don't know, that's something that I'm still kind of like figuring out and trying to, and I was just thinking like, oh man, Caree talked about having the role description like written out with all the bullet points. And I was like, I should really go back to the job description from when I applied to my current role and maybe print that out and look at that and have that as a reference, because that's a really great tip to just like help you find where the boundaries are, because they're not always super clear.
Yeah, and I think those boundaries are different depending on the company you're at, the size of the team that you're managing, and you know, just like the work in general. You might have more opportunity to actually dig into the code and, you know, have some ownership over some part of the code base or something like that. Even as an EM, if you have a smaller team, you know, if you're at a startup or something where, you know, everybody's wearing 35 different hats and has, you know, all these different responsibilities, you know, that's a surefire way to get your hands into everything. But at the same time, you know, you need both of those skill sets to be a manager. You need the soft skills. You need, you know, to understand people before, you know, you can do it. But also you need the technical skills, right? Like that's why we still do coding interviews and system design interviews whenever we're hiring EMs, because maybe you don't need to, like, you know, write all the algorithms from scratch yourself, but it is going to come to you where, you know, your team needs technical advice. And, you know, hopefully you can provide that, or you can point them to the people that do have it. But having that knowledge is really beneficial, because I think most engineers, they aren't going to really like enjoy working for a very non-technical manager. I mean, I know that I don't know many that do really, but you know, I think it really depends on the company you're at. I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at. Yeah, smaller companies, way more opportunity to, you know, just dig into everything and do a little bit of everything.
So kind of in that line, right? Like, what are some of the differences between like a very high level IC and a manager? So when I think about somebody who's, you know, and it depends on the place, right? Like, but whatever the equivalency is at your organization for like a senior manager or director in the technical track, whether that's, you know, senior staff or principal or architect or whatever you want to call it, right? because there is a ton of overlap. And I say this very honestly as somebody who's gotten a lot of feedback on my own resume that they're like, the bullet points and the titles don't exactly match up. Right. And you know, how do you also work with people who are in those, you know, very high level IC roles? Where do you see the divisions?
So I'll say the two companies where I've managed, the way and really honestly what drove me towards the decision of management was the way I saw senior engineers progressing, was as you get towards principal or even like distinguished as the highest level engineer that I've interacted with, it becomes less about doing the thing and more about doing the thing the right way. So a junior level engineer can code you a button that when you press it, it makes a sound. And a distinguished level engineer can code you a button that's up to spec, up to, you know, the right styles, and makes the sound 300 milliseconds faster. For me, I didn't have the drive to kind of tinker and optimize and really improve upon things once I jumped that first hurdle of do the thing. And so I realized for me, I get a lot out of people telling me that I helped them accomplish a thing more than I do out of accomplishing a thing myself. And I just didn't have the drive to really, you know, make those micro optimizations and have that deep knowledge. So for me, it was just really clear that, you know, my passion is people, more so than minutia of code.
Yeah, Molly, I feel the same way. You know, I was noticing a lot of engineers around me who had started their careers at the same time, you know, going towards, we call them like tracks. Are you on the manager track? Are you on the technical leadership track, the architect track, right? And I didn't know, but I noticed, you know, that certain engineers gravitate towards certain problems, right? And then I found myself gravitating towards almost people problems, right? And so, you know, one direction of the fork is towards technical strategy, right? And I would argue that there's some of that in engineering management for sure, but engineering management involves a lot of people strategy. There's this whole partnership with recruiting, with HR, with other leaders that exists as an engineering manager that doesn't really exist in any other role in quite the same way. You're directly responsible for your team. You are tasked with coaching them, with giving them, you know, feedback, those hard conversations that we discussed, you know, and really partnering with, yeah, I want to say HR, but it's not always HR, partnering with your HR department or your other, you know, fellow engineering managers to think about people strategy. Where should the organization be in a year? What's working, what's not working, things like that. And if those problems energize you, that's great, right? Maybe that's a sign that people management or engineering management would be something you would enjoy. If those problems of thinking about a reorg and you know, organizing things and facilitating things like that just gives you a headache, if thinking about having one of those hard conversations just sounds so draining to you, or maybe you've had those hard conversations and it's so draining to you, maybe that's a sign that, you know, you're stimulated by different problems. But that's the biggest shock to my system, I guess, when I became an engineering manager, was not realizing how much exposure to that side of the job I was going to actually have. I think I was aware that, you know, I was going to have direct reports and I was going to have to give feedback and things like that. I was very nervous about that actually, but I didn't realize all of the mechanics behind that and all the preparation that goes into arriving at the difficult conversation, for instance.
Yeah, and a lot of the stuff that goes into that, like hiring is really exciting. I love building teams. I love like bringing people in and, you know, hyping up the positions and everything like that. Like that's really exciting to me. And you know, the more you do it, like kind of, you know, the better you get with it. But I don't know, like there's so many areas like that whenever you start to see like, you know, how you can bring people in and develop them in different ways. And then you start to see like their growth and, you know, you start to see them take off. You know, and you bring somebody in as a junior engineer and then like a year later, you're like promoting them to senior engineer because like, you know, you poked at them a little bit and then all of a sudden they own this huge part of the code base. And it feels really good as a leader to see that happen and to be able to, you know, promote your team. And, you know, like, you know, we talked a lot about those hard conversations, but there's also the good conversations that like kind of make it worthwhile, right? You know, seeing these people excel and, you know, helping them further their career and helping steer them in the right direction. It feels really good at the end of the day. And I think that's the reason why I stick with it anyway.
Yeah, I think I echo what everyone else has said. I think the biggest difference between the kind of you know, senior IC work versus EM is the style and the scale of the impact is very different. So as an IC, you will have a lot of influence on the product, the technology, or maybe like the quality of the product. But as an EM, you can oversee and influence the direction of all of those. So and I think for successful EMs, it's good to see this as an opportunity to work through others. So for example, if I care about the quality of the code on my team, I can try to motivate a senior IC or just anyone on the team to think through what code quality could mean for the team. And then kind of allow them to influence software engineering standards on the team, see them grow in leadership. So I can influence in that way, but I could go in and enforce every small thing, but that would be micromanagement. So like being able to take a step back and working through others is one key difference I see. As the levels go up, I do see there are overlaps in terms of influence. So at Block, for example, at L6, you're a team lead, whether it is an IC or an engineering manager, versus at L7, that's an organizational influence. You have some influence over the org, versus L8, it is a company-wide influence. So as an EM, you can have that company-wide influence, or you can do the same thing as a technology leader. So an interesting thing here is if you are an EM, you could be managing ICs at a higher level than you. So you really need to be able to come in with the level of like understanding of like how to manage those situations. And if someone at a higher level comes to you and asks you like, hey, I'm struggling with this technical problem, like even if you are not able to give them the solution for it, like can you coach them, can you mentor, can you find them a mentor, can you find them like someone to bounce ideas off of, or you know, those kind of things. So it's more about like I see it as working through others. And I think the big thing here, I think Stephanie pointed out, is seeing the fulfillment when you, like there's a certain type of fulfillment you get when you write code and you see it work, versus the type of fulfillment you get when you see someone like influencing someone to get to that. And if that gives you more happiness, that's like a good sign that you are ready to move into management, I think, because I remember very clearly, like I was very excited about someone that I helped to promote. It was my first promo. And I just remember being extremely excited. And around the same time, I was getting a promo for myself. But I just remember like I was so nervous about their promo and so excited when theirs came through. And I think for me, that solidified like just, okay, like that's where I love working, like that space of helping people get to the next level, and like seeing people say, hey Sita, like I never really saw myself doing that, thanks for pushing me towards that. Like those are the kind of things that give me fulfillment. So I think like that's a slight different framing, but you're still getting to the same end result, right? Like you're still shipping the product, you're still meeting business metrics, all of that, but like the ownership model is slightly different.
So before we come to our kind of like conclusion piece, I did kind of want to touch in a little bit on some of the things that came up in terms of themes around some of the questions. But like really, how do you deal with some of the bad actors? How do you deal with some of the bad situations? One that I can reflect on from my experience in that kind of frontline manager role was I was like one of 3 people in a room where a situation happened, and the situation happened with somebody in my organization. Was not good. I remember just immediately thereafter having to go directly to my director and recommend that we terminate this person. And it was heartbreaking. I legitimately cried. This was someone who I considered a friend, and cared about deeply, had made a lot of accommodations to ensure that this kind of situation wouldn't happen. But it did, right? Like every time it always does, right? And you know, how do you, like, to this day, that whole conversation, that whole thing is like it's glued in my mind. So, you know, how do you deal with or navigate with those situations? How do you or, you know, some of the bad actors, or the difficult parts, you know, not being able to give someone a promotion because you just don't have the budget, or even though they rightfully are working 2 or 3, you know, levels above what their pay grade is. And you know, how do you play that like boundary, you know, with the company and everything else? How do you manage your own personal integrity in all of those situations too? Because it can be hard.
I have so many thoughts about this, Stacy, because it remains the hardest part of the job for me. As a brand new manager, I really didn't know where that line was or how to handle that situation at all. As an IC, it's different, right? You can feel, well, often you are, right? You're kind of powerless to influence the situation at times. And you're like, do I just leave this job? Do I try to talk to my manager about this? Do I feel like I am comfortable? Things like that. As a leader, you have a position of influence. I think someone in the chat mentioned, I want to be a manager because there's so many bad ones. And that was very much my feeling when I entered the industry. My advice, if you're thinking about getting into it, is know where you personally will draw the line. You know, for me, it was pay equity. For me, it was, I don't want to work with anybody who makes me feel unsafe or gross or anything. And I have confronted that situation. I gave my manager at a former job an ultimatum. I said, I cannot work with this individual anymore. And I mean that quite literally. If I have to work with them for one more day, I'm quitting. So you have to make a decision. You can get rid of this person or I will leave. Very direct, because I'd already decided ahead of time, this is my line. I never want to deal with this again, and I'm not going to. That does take some leverage, right? You can't just walk out of a job if you're in a difficult situation financially or in your career. And I know that's not something everybody feels capable of doing, but hopefully by the time you reach management, you know, that feels like an option. And if it isn't, I would encourage you to work towards a place of that being an option, because it's a very empowering place to be. Same with pay equity. You know, I worked on a team where, you know, as a manager, you can see all of the salaries, right? It's very different. Once you enter it, you have all of this data. And I saw misalignment, immediate, unjustifiable misalignment with salaries. We were compensating one of our senior engineers. And once again, I said, I am leaving. I cannot take responsibility for this inequity on my team. If you do not give me the tools to correct it, I am leaving, and someone else will have to defend the decision. And so I've done that a couple of times. It's kind of the nuclear option, right? But it feels good to have that as an option and to send a very, very clear message with clear consequences. Like Steph mentioned, you know, when managers leave, you know, who has to pick up the slack? Well, it's your manager. It's the manager of the manager, your skip level, right? So that's a pain point, right? You've now created a different problem for that organization and hopefully given them something to think about, you know, in terms of making better decisions in the future. So that feels really good to me personally. And I would encourage you, you know, write it down, write down what is your line, what will you tolerate, what will you not? I don't want to come to work and feel like I have to be the face of decisions that I can't sit with, you know, that keep me up at night, right? That's very draining to me. That's not what I got into management for. And so anytime I'm in a position to have to do that, usually when I start looking for an exit and I start having those hard conversations with my manager.
Yeah, and to sort of play off of that, sometimes you might be dealing with a person that's being maybe intentionally malicious. And sometimes you might be dealing with somebody that's just not a good performer. And then sometimes you might be dealing with somebody who is an incredible performer, but impossible to work with, or, they don't have, they don't have the soft skills to get their, to articulate what it is that they want to do, right? They just kind of want to force it down. And those situations are really tough. Lots of people have different communication styles. And, I've found that like the people in that third category have been the most challenging, because sometimes they're so good that you want to retain them, but at the same time they're so difficult to work with that like your whole team is coming to you and they're like, I can't work with this person. They're awful. They yell at me, they respond to my Jira comments with sarcastic one-word replies instead of answering my questions. Those kinds of things where you really have to like make the case for this, right? And every situation like that is different. I always try really hard to make sure that any kind of any kind of thing that happens like that is really well documented, and and we do everything that we can to understand why it's happening. Like, are you not being heard? Do you not have, is your manager like not not stepping in here? Is there some kind of like issues with this team where you guys aren't communicating? Like, so you really have to go in and figure out and really debug the problem before you can start taking action on it. And it's always different. And sometimes like Stacy said, the people that you're having to work through these kinds of things, they might be your friends, they might be your best friend. And at the end of the day, things aren't where they need to be. Yeah, and it's really tough. And you just have to learn how to deal with these things, and not get too disheartened when they happen.
I think for me, like the personal integrity, it's a big part of the job, especially when you're a manager, because you're faced with this more. When you're an IC, you write code, you go into like design discussions and all this. Like personal integrity isn't like a thing that keeps coming up, at least in my experience. It didn't really come up that frequently. But being in an org where where there's a good culture really helps. Like I will definitely speak for Cash App saying like we have things in the eng level stating like psychological safety as a criteria for all the levels. So ensuring psychological safety, or like creating an environment where there's knowledge sharing, like there's things like this that point to people not being jerks essentially. So like I have that to be able to use in my toolkit. So when I have like conversations, I can relate it around performance against criteria. And that makes it a lot easier to have those conversations, because I can say you're not meeting L6 expectations, because part of team building is that you are creating psychological safety, and you're actually doing the opposite of that. And that's something I'm worried about. So we can start like, like moving towards an easier, like at least we're starting getting on the same page. If that's not available at your org, that's something you can help to craft. Like if you're seeing that, and ideally like your lead or lead's lead will be in agreement or alignment with you, but you can start to craft something like that. Like are the success criteria for each of the eng levels clear? Because that is the baseline. Like that's where you align between ICs and EMs. So it's a great place to start off. But at the end of the day, like Caree said, getting yourself to a point where like this job isn't the thing that like you have to have, is just like, it is a very empowering place to be for anyone. I think that was extremely good advice, just to like be able to focus on that. And if you're at that point, like a job where someone is telling you to do something that doesn't sit right with you, you don't have to do. And this is kind of what I was saying about politics. Like, I don't like playing politics. The only time I will try to play politics is if it's something I'm trying to defend my team for. And that comes from like a core value where I'm like, I care about my team. And so if I need to like do something or like navigate a situation to do what's best for my team, I will do it. But if it's in the best interest of some random person, I won't do it. And if I have to like if I have to, like, I'll take an ultimatum. And so like being in that position is very empowering, but also like you can sleep better at night. So like I always prefer that option.
So I have a topic I'd like to bring up. Hi, everyone. I was talking with a former coworker at my last job. I worked mostly in startups. 10 months ago, I started at AWS. So I jumped ship and ran for the hills because of this last job. This text, he mentions, something about you must intimidate men in power. I wanted to bring that up as a topic just because it's very topical for me right now. There was a massive problem at my last company. And there was 2 back-to-back managers that were just very problematic and very anti me. They were directly fighting me, and I was trying to advocate for myself and the team. So how do you navigate those sorts of situations?
Maybe Tracy, I can bring this up. The vast majority of the places I've ever worked, I've been the highest ranking technical female in the entire organization. Sometimes, at least in one case, I was the only technical female in the entire company. And we're talking like a company of like 100 people. So like, this is another one where you have to like read the room, read the politics. I strongly suggest coaching. Sometimes there's just some guys. Carrie would know the person that I was talking about in one of those 3 one of those things. And I've personally had more than one time where my manager, someone senior to me, said really derogatory, sexist remarks behind my back repeatedly. There's some people you can't win over. And sometimes there's just the mere existence of you is intimidating. Because they might be, you could, I said baked goods. Come on, like what could say more of like, hi, I'm just this shy female who's, you know, doing all the female things. But just what's historically worked for me is with those people, just making sure that you have the right alignment for what helps them in their goals or the support that they require. Treat it as a transactional relationship, not as a personal one. Have business and personal, have mutual respect in that regard. You can't win everyone over. The intimidation thing, it's really, really difficult. I'm very bubbly in my usual day-to-day life. And very like, I got criticized for over celebrating other people's wins and just being like, hey, you got here on time today, high five. Like, you know, just because the little, I value just like maybe being a little overjoyous, a little over positive. But not everybody's that way. So really, I would just find what it is, like the base mutual respect of those relationships, and understand that there is just a certain subsect of people that may or may not work for. Another avenue that's really worked for me is knowing how I relate to people. So I can usually get to people on a baser level through comedy, and gain kind of that piece there. That worked with professors in college. I was the only female in my entire major for 3.5 years. And when I say the major, I mean literally anybody in the 4 years of track. Like, I was a senior, somebody entered second half of freshman year to be in this major who also identified as female. There's just, I had professors tell me all kinds of wonderful, wonderful things. And, I had managers tell me to my face, I think technology is a great place for women, but when you have a family, your place is in the home. You got to just find what you're willing to tolerate too, right? Like Caree's going like shake head.
Just because I relate and I know some of these stories, Stacy. Yeah, and Tracy, I would say the first red flag in what you told me was that someone's giving you feedback that you're intimidating. That's not descriptive. That's not actionable. You don't have to take in every piece of feedback that you get. As a people pleaser, that was a lesson I needed to learn. Some people, they have walls up and feedback just bounces right off of them and doesn't get in, and that's a problem. And on the other end of the spectrum are people like myself. I used to have the tendency, if someone made one comment to me, I'd overthink for the rest of the day. Oh, why did they say that to me? And every piece of feedback I thought I had to fix, right? If feedback's low quality, if it's not actionable, if you can't find something within that feedback that is relevant to your career growth, that you feel serves you, then toss it. That's advice I've given to a lot of people in tech, is toss it out. Maybe it just was, outlier data. Maybe that's their problem, that they're intimidated. Maybe that's actually something they need to work on, is why are you so intimidated? Do you feel like you're in competition with people at work? Do you feel that you can't have a cooperative relationship with people, and so their success is a threat to you? So that might be something they have to unpack, and it has nothing to do with you. I think there's a quote that says, what other people think of me has nothing to do with me. It's none of my business. I wouldn't apply that to your career as a blanket statement, but sometimes it really is just their problem that they need to figure out. A great way to, kind of gently challenge feedback like that is to ask them, well, give me an example, give me another example. When this intimidation, comes out, what is it? I have received feedback personally that I'm intimidating by a couple of people. One was a close friend. And when I asked her, why did you find me intimidating when we first met? She said, well, because you're really quiet and you tend to kind of stare, you can be a little bit intense. And that was actionable. I was like, well, I can fix that. I don't know. I kind of have RBF, resting B face. So I don't know if I can ever totally fix that. But I was like, I can work on that. I can work on my small talk skills, soft skills like that, and maybe break the ice with my team in a way that makes them feel comfortable immediately. On the other hand, I've gotten feedback that I'm intimidating from someone. And when I asked why, it boiled down to, I simply disagreed with something that they said, and I voiced that. And they couldn't give me anything deeper than that I could take action on. And I decided, I want to work in a place where I can disagree with someone and things be civil, and for that not to be taken personally. And so I tossed that feedback in that situation.
Yeah, building on that, I just wanted to, because I'm totally on that page, more context to this conversation. And I mean, this is an old coworker who is a man and was very supportive of me, and did agree that I got the short end of the stick here. And it was a very similar situation to what you just described. This new engineering manager came into the team, and he gave me a one-on-one, and his only feedback was, you're too negative. And he didn't expand on it. So I said, can you give me some examples of when I was too negative? He refused. Just be more just smile more. Just what, and I pushed and I pushed, and it turns out, I had to piece this together through different conversations that he just didn't like me pushing back on him when he had like an idea that maybe wasn't good for the team. Because at that point, I'd been on the team for 2 years and he was brand new. So I had more insight into the internal workings, but he didn't want my feedback. He just wanted to come in and be in charge. So that became a big thing that eventually led to me leaving the company, because it was not solvable, because he would not give me actionable anything to improve.
I gotta say, you probably did the right thing, because like that kind of nonsense usually is kind of like, it's an infection that like goes up the chain of command at companies, where sometimes that kind of behavior is encouraged. And different companies are going to be different. Sorry you had to deal with that.
One of the things that I've learned, one of the tactics I've learned recently as a manager is situation, behavior, result, feedback. And so if, the situation was you were being perceived as negative, or the situation was whatever happened, the behavior was you behaved in a way that was perceived as negative, then it was on your manager to tell you what the result of that was. And if the result of that was that he's butthurt, too bad. So that sucks that happened. But I think that's the kind of bad management that drives the right people into management, because they don't want to see that happen again to somebody else. Ooh, actionable, specific, and kind. I haven't seen that acronym before. Thank you, Carrie.
Okay, I think on that note, it's after 8 p.m. and so we should probably wrap things up. Stacy, do you have any final questions?
Just wanted to present each of our panelists tonight with an opportunity to tell us where to find you and what you're up to next.
Like an open mic. So the only place I exist professionally on the internet anymore is LinkedIn. You can find me, Molly King. I think in my picture, my hair is green. So heads up, it changes. What? Oh, there you go. Thank you, Melissa. I don't have anything coming up next. I'm just trying to figure out how to be a better manager every day.
Yeah, for me, I don't know what's next right now. I'm like really focused on helping my current company figure out how to get to the next level, be it, an exit, or, we're mostly aiming for massive growth right now. So that's kind of where I'm sticking around. You can find me, pretty much the only place I exist online nowadays is on Mastodon. I am hackaderm.io/@bliss.
Yeah, same here. I put my LinkedIn in the sidebar. I technically have a Twitter, but I don't log in very much anymore. It's just kind of there because I have a lot of network over there and want to hold on to it. So feel free to add me. You don't have to leave a note or anything. I'll know it's from Women Who Code.
Yeah, same here. It was really nice being here today. Thanks, Stacy. Thanks, Melissa. I'm adding my LinkedIn here. Feel free to reach out if you want to chat about anything.
Well, thank you tonight to all of our panelists, and I'm so excited for us to continue the conversation. Each of them presented a way for you to kind of keep in contact or just follow them on their journey, and know that many of the other folks in Women Who Code Leadership are also available via the Slack if you ever have any questions, comments, concerns. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and thank you so much to each of our panelists.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, this was really great. And thanks everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Stacy, for being a great MC tonight. Appreciate it.